You're a soldier of the Allies. Spring of 1918. Artillery shells with poison gas fall within your lines. While you put your mask on, a bunch of grenades reach your trench, so you take cover. As you stand up, you see a gas mask and a helmet, worn by a terrifying German soldier. He quickly charges towards you. A human isn't supposed to move this fast. He throws a grenade to the machine gun nest behind you, ignores you, and immediately heads to the following line. As you see your defenses shattered, you can't help but be terrified. Who could blame you? After all, who you just met is, for all intents and purposes, a monster. The German Empire entered the Great War expecting quick mobile victories similar to the one they had 40 years prior in the Franco-Prussian War, but eventually the trench warfare slowed everything down, which was a big concern for Germany, who had the resources to face multiple nations at the same time, but not forever. Tactical maneuvers like the ones using railways in the Eastern Front allowed them to make territorial progress, but that didn't happen on the Western Front, so an alternative was needed. One of them was Falkenhayn's idea of a war of attrition, which went horribly in Verdun, but there was another alternative. Enter the shock troops. Let me go back in time real quick. Bolt-action rifles were introduced a little while after the Napoleonic Wars in 1824, and they quickly became the European fashion of being able to shoot more than 4 times per minute. So the times of close order infantry, shooting in line and stuff, were coming to an end. So the Prussians and other European armies relied on accurate fire and only bayonet charge when they were meters away from the enemy line. In German, the word to name these rifles was Gewehr. During the Second Boer War in South Africa, from 1899 to 1902, the Boer tactics became well known, which were faster, hit-and-run guerrilla tactics used by the Boer soldiers called commandos. They were lighter, faster, and more efficient than the slow-moving British columns. And yes, that's where the word commando comes from. In World War I, the assault tactics were the basic and infamous strategy of an artillery barrage followed by an infantry charge, which ended up in thousands paying the price of a mile, if it actually worked. As an honorable mention, the first modern use of shock troops was by the Paraguayans in the Paraguayan Wars of the 1860s. I'm not kidding, Google it. Although Austro-Hungary was testing their assault troops, the Jack Commandos, and the Italians were developing their own counterparts, German officers were doing their own thing. Some shock tactics were developed by some German detachments before Verdun, but they weren't fully fledged. The first one to do so, in March of 1915, was the Calso Sturmabteilung. It consisted of multiple officers, 2 pioneer companies, a rifle company, and a relatively light 37mm artillery gun. They used body armors and shields, almost like knights in World War I. A surprise attack from the Allies caused them to be used as a regular detachment, instead of its assault purposes. In September of that year, Prussian captain Willy Rohr took the lead of the Sturmabteilung, who exchanged the heavy armor for lighter and faster units. Only the Stahlhelm helmets remained. His decision proved effective in October when they assaulted the French in Vosges, with squadrons executing tactics independently. The name he gave to these squadrons was Stoßtruppen, which means push troops, shock troops, or Sturmtruppen. More and more soldiers from other units joined the Stoßtruppen in their training, under the leading of Rohr, who ended up training divisions from Austro-Hungary, especially the Jack Commandos. The equipment was further improved, from lighter boots to leather patches on knees and elbows to protect them when crawling, and bigger bags for grenades. They got a lighter Karabiner 98A, known as Kar 98A, instead of the Gewehr 98. And the Lugers were upgraded with a 32 round drum magazine. Some would even get knives or clubs. hence my avatar. Their first major use was in the early days of the Battle of Verdun in February of 1916, where they managed to wreak havoc in the French lines immediately after the artillery stopped shooting. But in summer of 1916, the Brusilov offensive introduced some assault tactics on Russia's part. Some of the shock troops they used were the Hunter commandos, possibly inspired by the Boer ones. They're called hunters because a great part of their training took place while hunting. They will do reconnaissance and fight in no man's land if needed. They're considered to be the precursors of the Spetsnaz. The French captain André Lafargue wrote a pamphlet about infiltration tactics, inspired by his own experiences, which spoke about practices such as having the first wave, spotting hard to defeat defenses, but not attacking them, allowing the following waves to do so with higher success rates. The Germans captured this pamphlet. Bernhard Redemann, who was heavily involved in the creation of the flamethrower and the subsequent Stormtroopers, and Captain Roa adopted all of the former knowledge to develop the tactics that would be later known as Stoßtruppen. These initially included clearing out the trenches themselves, but that changed. The most effective modus operandi was to have squads of the best trained soldiers, led by sub-officers with independent decision making, who would traverse no man's land, pierce an enemy line in the most convenient points, causing chaos in various ways, and continue to the following line, to then have the following waves defeating the now confused and weakened forces. The recruiting requirements were to be under 25 years of age. They had to be fast, strong, sharp, single, wasn't expecting that one, and they needed to be brave and reckless. Ideally, the kind of soldier who enjoys meeting the enemy eye to eye. Their best sources of these were the Jägers, which is a general term for light infantry. The German ones were proficient in forest warfare and sharpshooter tactics, and the Pioneer Corps, who were proficient in breaching through defenses using flamethrowers and were very passionate about the art of throwing irrational amounts of grenades into the enemy trenches, which quickly became the Stoßtruppen's favorite way of terrifying the enemy. They mainly used the Stielhandgranate, a blast grenade that was used to stun the enemy, which was named Potato Masher by the British, and is one of the most recognizable weapons of both world wars. It does look like a wooden potato masher, to be fair. They also used a fragmentation grenade when needed. Some of them will operate the Danish Madsen light machine gun. Contrary to popular belief, the MP-18 submachine gun probably wasn't used until fall of 1918. After Ludendorff took command after Falkenhayn, he allowed their development in all areas of the army. They were deployed in all fronts that Germany was fighting at the time. They soon neared trenches, sometimes at night. The pioneers breached through defenses, threw hundreds of blast grenades. Some fired flamethrowers, and the others horrified the enemy with proficient rifle fire or melee. One of the main developers of further Stoßtrupp improvement was General Oskar von Hutier, who made them more effective by introducing the use of poison gas artillery to make their arrival even more shocking. He instructed them to avoid any unnecessary combat and focusing on dispersing the enemies in every single line to the very last one, taking or destroying everything of importance and calling it a day before the rest of the army took the area. They became the elite of the German army. The Jag commandos soon emulated everything they did, and the Ottomans made their own version. They received privileges in food, money, way more time outside of the front. They were like rock stars. They come in, do their job, and go home. That's it. But that job was the most dangerous, probably, of the entire war. In some cases, they were encouraged to cross no man's land while the German artillery was still firing. And they often did it, despite the obvious risk. The casualty rate was quite high, and it probably wasn't spoken about to prevent panic. Some totally unknown officer called Erwin Rommel was responsible for one of the Stoßtruppen's greatest feats, the Battle of Caporetto, where 100 of them maneuvered the living hell out of the Italians, facing the Arditi, who I've made a video about. However, they will become the Sandman of the Great War during the German Spring Offensive from the 21st of March to the 5th of April of 1918. The Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's War, where they used everything they had learned to carry out a successful offensive, taking the British lines, not one or two or three, but 4 consecutive times. And for the first time in 4 years, the stalemate of the Western Front was shattered. Disregarding the losses due to their success and not being rotated out of action, they honored their name. The Stoßtruppen were the Kaiser's untrusting bayonet. But the 2 weeks of constant service exhausted the moving troops, who were facing a harsh terrain and the spread of Spanish influenza. Although they initially made the Entente forces retreat, they were still strong, and they repelled the following German offensives, who couldn't defeat the UK as intended. The Allied 100 Days Offensive will follow, successful as a consequence of the demoralized German troops, who had all of their faith on their elite success. Although Stoßtruppen companies fought bravely on all other fronts, Germany was defeated. Their legacy carried on strongly, as every major party of the post-war Weimar Republic adopted their imagery. Almost like angels, they were the symbols of virtue, proficiency, strength and courage of the time. Many veterans joined the National Socialist, Communist and the monarchist Stahlhelm Party, but the strongest inheritors were the Freikorps or Volunteer Corps, multiple right-wing paramilitaries with its origins linked to the fight against Napoleonic rule 100 years prior. Fun fact, it is believed that the colors of the uniform of the Lutzow's Freikorps inspired the flag of the Republic of Germany. They worked for the Social Democrat Party or even the government itself, and mostly executed the Stoßtrupp-Taktik with effectiveness in their civil war against the Spartacist communist uprising in 1919, with 500,000 official members and another 1.5 million de facto ones. Many of them veterans who were brutalized by the war and probably suffered PTSD. They will fight Marxism in Latvia, Poland and East Prussia as well, where many committed crimes in the name of democracy or Germany, although many of their men disapproved it. When Adolf you-know-who took power, the brutalism against non-Germans was encouraged, and those Freikorps or veterans who opposed to it will be executed or deported. It's sad how something virtuous got corrupted into something vile. In modern military, the Stoßtruppen transcended pretty much everywhere. Modern militaries don't have shock troops since their tactics are integrated into the standard training, so there's a bit of a stormtrooper on any well-trained soldier. They appear in all of the entries of the World War I series as playable troops, but don't expect much more than a rifle and grenades. This is accurate stuff. And of course, the band Sabaton made a song about them, Stormtroopers, which is 100% my favorite one. And that's it, now you know that the real life Stormtroopers actually had a currency, unlike the white plastic ones. Anyway, ciao!